Jordan Blake, a black female driver, is pulled over in the middle of the night at a random checkpoint, no clear reason, just the gut feeling of a white cop full of bias. He questions her because the car is too nice, and her confidence feels like a threat. What he doesn't know is that she's a U.S. Secret Service agent. When a convoy of unmarked black SUVs suddenly rolls in and gunfire breaks the silence, the lines between right and wrong, power and justice, start to blur. So what path will Jordan take? Reveal her true identity to get out alive, or silently take control and leave everyone stunned? And what about the officer? Raised on suspicion and prejudice, can he change when faced with a truth too brutal to ignore? Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Beneath scattered rain and the overcast night sky of a quiet American suburb, Jordan Blake's sleek black car glided down a deserted highway. The headlights cut through the wet rocks and thin mist, casting a scene that felt both dreamlike and ominous. Jordan, calm yet commanding, drove with practiced precision, unfazed by the sleepy haze of the midnight road. She knew there was a mobile checkpoint ahead. The intel had come in earlier, and she was prepared. Vehicle papers, fake identity, every cover checked and double-checked. But even for someone like Jordan, who'd stared death in the face more times than she could count, instinct whispered one unshakable truth. It's the smallest things that often ignite the biggest collisions. She slowed down as her headlights lit up the checkpoint. Just a single patrol car, a few reflective signs, and one man standing beside an idling police SUV. Checkpoints like these, lined with reflective tape and flashing lights, were meant to signal safety, but they often became silent stages for bias and baseless suspicion to play out, especially in the hands of certain officers. Travis Denton, a middle-aged officer with a rugged face, stood on duty. His cap was tilted just right, uniform pressed sharp. Under the flickering fluorescent light, he glanced at the black luxury car approaching, and immediately something tightened in his gut. A nameless unease, a creeping doubt. To Travis, the sight of a black woman driving an expensive car, alone, this late, through a quiet small-town road, it all felt off. His mind, fed by years of half-truths and passed-down fears, began to stitch together a narrative. Trouble, accidents, whispered warnings. It wasn't just the car, it was who she was in it. And to him, none of it fit the picture of what this town was supposed to look like. As Jordan's car eased toward the checkpoint, Travis couldn't suppress the growing tension in his chest. He flicked on his siren, a soft whoop, a signal to stop. Officers on night shifts were used to a routine. But this wasn't routine. To Travis, every car that passed wasn't just transportation, it was a symbol, a reflection of how people lived and how they fit into a system. And Jordan's polished, meticulously maintained vehicle made something in him twitch. What's going on here? What doesn't add up? Her headlights caught Travis's face for the first time. Through the mist, her eyes remained calm but unreadable. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She just waited, her presence grounded by training and a quiet confidence that didn't need to speak loudly. But to Travis, that composure wasn't reassuring. It was unsettling. Years of being shaped by an old system had taught him that confidence like that, from someone like her, wasn't normal. It had to mean something else. The checkpoint, once silent, now hummed with tension. Patrol cameras flickered to life, red and blue lights pulsing like a quiet siren song of suspicion. Travis kept one hand on the wheel of his cruiser as he approached her window. His voice dropped low, firm, tinged with the arrogance of someone convinced they were in control. "Mind telling me where you're headed this late at night?" A question that sounded simple, but wasn't. It was laced with implication, like a net cast wide, waiting to catch something wrong. Jordan gave a small smile, neither warm nor hostile, just passing through, headed to the next state. Travis nodded slowly, eyes locked on hers before scanning the steering wheel. The car's pristine interior, the faint glow reflecting off a documented case on the passenger seat. In this town, people knew each other. Outsiders were rare, and someone like Jordan, she didn't belong. Jordan felt his gaze clearly. It wasn't procedural. It was personal. It was the kind of cold, dissecting stare that had been used for generations to make people like her feel smaller, to remind them of invisible lines they were never meant to cross. But she said nothing. She waited, and in that silence, something began to spark, an invisible collision between two worlds, one built on the belief in authority, the other shaped by years of moving in shadows, answering to a deeper law. Travis Denton walked slowly toward the black car, each step carrying the quiet weight of assumptions he'd never had to name. A faint smile hung on his lips, the kind cops wear when they're trying to seem friendly, but their eyes give them away, scanning every movement like it might crack open a hidden truth. The small flashlight in his hand flicked on, even though the streetlights made everything perfectly visible. A sweep across the car's body, more for performance than necessity. Jordan sat still, hands resting calmly on the wheel, exactly as protocol demanded. Her gaze met his without flinching, neither challenging nor submissive. She'd lived through enough encounters like this with men like Travis, men who didn't see skill, composure, or discipline. They saw skin tone and the confidence that felt like a threat. Travis gave a slow nod, eyes drifting across her face before he finally spoke. "You seem real calm. Driving clean, picked a quiet stretch of road, business trip?" The question sounded casual, but Jordan knew better. It wasn't harmless. Her voice was even, direct. "I already answered that question, officer." Travis raised an eyebrow like her answer had triggered something. He leaned slightly, peering into the car's interior. Clean, orderly, nothing suspicious. And yet, the perfection of it all only made him more uneasy. It was too smooth, too deliberate. "What kind of work has you out this late? What do you do?" Jordan paused. She knew she had every right not to answer, but she also knew that refusing would shift the tone, maybe escalate it. So she answered, short and controlled. "I work in security, specialized projects. I travel a lot." Travis nodded slowly again, but his eyes darkened. Security? That could mean anything. Building guard, camera tech, or a cover story. His mind began to spin its own web of possibilities, like a bad action movie playing on a loop inside his head. What kind of security pays for a car like this? Seems a little above the standard paycheck, don't you think? His tone turned sarcastic, edging toward condescension. Jordan stayed composed. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. Her gaze met his, steady. "I wasn't aware there's a law against black people owning nice cars." The line landed like a soft slap. No shouting, no defiance, but it hit. Travis clenched his jaw. She wasn't wrong, and that made it worse. Part of his mind tried to remind him that she hadn't broken any laws, but another part, the part trained by years in a town where different meant dangerous, urged him to push further. "Mind if I see your ID?" he asked, the friendly facade now gone. Jordan exhaled quietly and nodded, pulling out her leather wallet and handing it to him with both hands. Not out of fear, but precision. She knew how easily every motion could be misread. He glanced over the ID, name, address, date of birth, official seals. Nothing off. In fact, it was almost too perfect. "DC? Huh? That's a long way from here. Not many reasons to end up in this sleepy town." Jordan looked at him. She saw what he was doing. Stretching time, not to protect the public, but to protect the illusion of control. She didn't blink. "You don't think someone like me could have legitimate business out here?" The question was sharp, a mirror turned back on him. Travis let out a low chuckle, a mix of mockery and self-defense. "I'm just saying this ain't a usual stop for folks as busy as you." Jordan didn't respond. She didn't have to. She knew anything she said now would be filtered through a lens too fogged by history to see her clearly. A lens built not by Travis alone, but by the whispers of a culture that taught men like him to fear confidence when it came from someone like her. Travis handed back the ID, but didn't wave her through. Instead, he circled to the back of the car, continuing his inspection. There was no clear reason for it, just a lingering discomfort. Inside, Jordan felt the clock ticking. She couldn't let this drag on much longer, but every move had to be precise. One wrong step, one misunderstood gesture, and she'd go from passerby to suspect in an instant. And Travis, standing behind the car, still convinced he was on the verge of uncovering something big, had no idea he was digging a hole. Not for Jordan, but for the worldview he'd built his identity on. Travis Denton stood behind Jordan's car, pretending to inspect the license plate while his gaze drifted into the empty night. The wind carried the scent of asphalt and damp grass across the open road. But in his mind, the present blurred, giving way to an old fragment of memory, one that had silently shaped everything he believed in. He remembered clearly the first time he sat in a patrol car with his father, a seasoned officer in their small town. Travis had been only 10, his young eyes wide with admiration. His father, Mr. Denton, wasn't one for sweet words, but that night he said something Travis never forgot. "You know why I never let my guard down when I see out-of-state plates?" Travis shook his head. "Because different means trouble, and if it's a black driver, especially in a fancy car, you double your caution. In this town, if something feels off, it is off." There was no hatred in his tone. It sounded practical, like survival advice passed down. And that was what made it dangerous. It came from the person Travis trusted most, spoken in the most ordinary of moments. There was no reason to question it, no invitation to push back. Travis grew up on breakfasts with crime reports and dinners filled with case stories, not meant to scare but to teach him how to read a situation. Every story came with descriptions, skin color, tone of voice, how quickly someone reacted, as if these were reliable indicators of threat. Over time, he stopped seeing individuals. He started seeing patterns he was trained to spot. At the police academy, Travis became a model student. He didn't question, didn't push back, just absorbed and executed. Drills on rapid response, simulations of hostile arrests, lectures on potentially dangerous situations, they all reinforced a kind of professional instinct Travis came to trust. Black suspects moved faster, resisted more, and needed to be neutralized quicker. It didn't come from malice, it came from belief, a belief that he was doing the right thing. Every time he pulled someone suspicious, every time he found a small bag of drugs, a hidden weapon, or even just a traffic violation, he logged it as a minor victory. And no one ever told him, maybe you're looking harder at certain people simply because they don't look like you. But the one thing Travis never questioned was because of that night, 7 years ago. He and his partner, a young officer named Mitch, were patrolling near a new housing development where a few petty thefts had happened. A black teenager, maybe 18, rode past them on a bicycle and glanced over when he saw their cruiser. Mitch, raised with similar instincts, decided to follow. They asked him to stop for a safety check. When Mitch approached, everything exploded. One gunshot, one scream. Mitch collapsed, clutching his chest, blood spilling through his shirt. Travis pulled his weapon, reacting on pure reflex. The bullet he fired killed the teen instantly. Travis was praised afterward for quick thinking, for protecting his partner, for stopping a potential threat. But that night, when he got home and saw Mitch's mother sobbing over her son's photo, while the teenager's father was being handcuffed at the scene, something inside Travis cracked. But the memory never faded, and because of it, Travis always believed he was doing the right thing. Now, standing behind Jordan's car, watching this composed woman with steady eyes and a calm voice, Travis didn't realize. His reaction wasn't to the situation in front of him, it was to the shadow behind it. In Jordan's eyes, he didn't just see a black woman, he saw that boy again. Not because they looked alike, but because he'd never learned to look any other way. What he didn't know was that across the steering wheel, Jordan was cycling through her own mental protocols. She recognized the shift. This wasn't a traffic check anymore. This was a confrontation, one where the man outside had no idea he'd been trained wrong, and where she didn't have the luxury of being wrong, not even for one breath. The chirping of crickets mixed with the soft breeze rolling across the pavement, casting a false calm over the checkpoint. But in the thick of that murky silence, the space between Jordan and Travis was dense enough to catch fire with a single spark. Jordan remained behind the wheel, eyes forward. She'd provided her documents and answered his questions, not in great detail, but enough to avoid being labeled uncooperative. Still, Travis hadn't walked away. He lingered at the rear of the car, flashlight once again sweeping across the license plate, as if searching for something his eyes had missed the first time. The knot in Jordan's chest grew tighter. Her experience from high-level overseas assignments had taught her one hard truth. When someone isn't looking for the truth but simply trying to confirm what they already believe, the exchange stops being fair. This was no longer a cop doing his job. This was a man chasing ghosts, haunted by doubts he couldn't even name. His shadow shifted toward the driver's side. Footsteps echoed against the empty road. He tapped the window. "Miss Blake." Jordan lowered the window slightly, turning to face him. Her expression was calm, though every fiber in her body was alert. "I need you to pop the trunk." The words sliced through the tension like a blade. Jordan didn't frown, didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze for a long beat before responding, her voice even. "Am I being investigated for a criminal offense, officer?" Travis hesitated. The question was clear and grounded in law, but what was driving him now wasn't law. It was a feeling, something vague but persistent, telling him something was off. "Not officially, but your unwillingness to cooperate raises concern. I just want to verify a few things." Jordan nodded slowly, measuring every word. "Officer Denton, I understand your job, but under the law, I have the right to decline a vehicle search unless you have a warrant or reasonable cause. I've provided valid documents. I'm under no obligation to open my trunk without a legal basis." Her tone was polite but firm, not defiant, not fearful, just grounded. And somehow, that composure rattled Travis more than anger would have. He was used to nervous glances, mumbled answers, people eager to move on. Jordan wasn't like them. Her poise, instead of calming him, triggered something deeper. The part of him that believed calm meant hiding something. "I'm asking you one more time. Open the trunk, or I'll request backup." Jordan turned fully toward him, hands still visible on the wheel. Her voice dropped, low and unwavering. "You're free to call whoever you like, but I also have the right to refuse an unlawful search. I suggest we end this here, unless you want to face a formal complaint for abuse of authority." Her voice, her posture, her eyes. She didn't sound like a civilian in a roadside dispute. She radiated command, and for the first time, Travis felt a crack in his control. He didn't know who she was, but deep down, something told him this woman was not someone easily broken. Instead of stepping back, he leaned in further, because if he didn't win this, something inside him feared losing more than just this exchange. He took a few steps back and pulled the radio from his shoulder. "This is Unit 14, checkpoint mile 212, requesting backup vehicle. Situation: uncooperative driver, possible transport of illegal materials. Nearest patrol, please respond." Jordan heard every word. She closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. It had gone too far. She knew if another unit arrived before she took control, things could spiral. But she wasn't cleared to reveal her identity. Not yet. The trunk, though it held nothing illegal, only sealed, classified documents, could still ignite a firestorm if interpreted the wrong way. She was walking a wire, and Travis, led by an unease he couldn't name or undo, was holding the scissors. He returned to his cruiser in silence, but his stare never left her. The glow of headlights reflected off Jordan's face, painting her like a warrior in the night, still, sharp, fully aware of the storm about to break. What began as a routine inspection had become a standoff, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because he couldn't accept that someone like her could exist without fear, without apology, without folding to power fed by prejudice. Through the patrol radio, a clipped voice responded. "Charlie 3 en route, ETA 5 minutes." The digital clock on Jordan's dashboard flicked to 12:17 a.m. Every passing minute ticked like a soft tap to her senses, a reminder that time was no longer on her side. Her team was waiting for a signal at the next junction, and if she didn't arrive before the central convoy did, the top-secret intel in the briefcase in her trunk risked being exposed, or worse, intercepted. But the situation had already gone past compromise. Travis calling for backup wasn't just procedural, it was a declaration. He wasn't letting this go. Jordan took one final breath, flipped on her left blinker, and calmly rolled her window down. Tilting her head, she spoke each word clearly, deliberately. "I've cooperated to the extent required by law. There's no legal basis for detaining me. If you insist on continuing this, I will file a complaint for abuse of authority." Travis stood just ahead of her car, silent. His jaw clenched, as if any second now he'd bark out an order to detain her at all costs. But before he could act, Jordan eased her foot onto the gas. The car moved, not fast, but with certainty. A soft sound clicked inside Travis, not from the radio, not the engine, but from somewhere deeper. A reflex, a bruised sense of control. She's fleeing. Deep down, Travis knew she hadn't broken any laws. But the instinct carved by years of standing watch in sleepy towns, where even the slightest anomaly gave purpose to an otherwise dull night, took over. His eyes narrowed. Fury welled up. Without another thought, he sprinted to his cruiser. The door slammed shut, headlights flared to life, and tires screeched against the asphalt, leaving behind thick black marks. Travis gripped the wheel, mind racing with justifications. She's hiding something, maybe contraband. No regular person reacts like this. And if I let her go, what if something happens? How could I live with that? In her rearview mirror, Jordan spotted the familiar flash of red and blue lights behind her. No surprise, she'd expected this. Now, every move had to be exact. No panic, no sudden shifts. She adjusted her speed, merging into a secondary lane running parallel to the highway, a stretch with enough visibility to assess the situation, yet just remote enough for tactical maneuvering. Inside his vehicle, Travis muttered to himself, trying to convince someone. "It's not because she's black, not because I hate her. It's because she's fleeing. Fleeing means guilt, right? Right? Right." Even as part of him knew that wasn't enough to justify a crime, his emotions refused to yield. In her mirror, Jordan didn't just see a cop chasing her, she saw a man sprinting after the ghost of his own fear. The trees along the roadside blurred into streaks. Travis's headlights remained locked behind her, relentless. Jordan's mind spun like a tactical processor. She couldn't be stopped before reaching the rendezvous point. But she couldn't risk a high-speed chase either. Not with lives on the line. One wrong move and this could become yet another late-night tragedy, the kind history knew too well, where people like her never lived to explain. She pressed a hidden switch beneath the steering wheel, activating a covert surveillance system. A soft chime lit up the dash. Decoy mode. Engaged. Immediately, the vehicle's onboard system simulated a false route, redirecting tracking signals toward a western bypass, far from the real meeting point. Jordan accelerated slightly, shifted into the middle lane, and triggered a fake left turn signal, just enough to sell the illusion. Travis, caught between fury and a desperate need to be right, bit down, hard. Aha! So you are trying to run? He hit the gas and veered left, chasing the ghost signal, but Jordan turned right. In less than 2 minutes, the gap between them stretched to nearly a kilometer. But she didn't feel relief, because Travis wasn't the real danger anymore. Not on his own. The real threat was that he'd already pulled the system into this mess, and if she didn't resolve it quickly, it wouldn't end with a chase. It would end with something far worse. She tapped her earpiece, switching to a secure encrypted channel. "This is Epsilon 7, local unit in pursuit, requesting immediate jamming and interception. Do not expose central convoy location." The response came without delay. "Acknowledged. Shadow unit en route. Maintain speed and current vector." Jordan adjusted her mirror. Her eyes were no longer cold like before, not like when she stared Travis down. Now there was weight behind them, not fear, but the kind of burden only those who've been forced to be perfect can understand. The night sky seemed to tighten, growing darker now that the glow of the highway was gone. Jordan slipped onto a side road flanked by sparse woods, the cold wind skimming across the pavement in long, eerie howls. Everything felt too quiet. The steady hum of the engine was the only sound breaking the silence inside the cabin. He'd lost Travis, for now, at least from a tactical standpoint. But no one who's worked in intelligence ever trusts distance alone. She glanced quickly at the rearview mirror. Nothing. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, waiting, anticipating. Then, just over the hill, 3 black SUVs emerged like phantoms. No sirens, no flashing lights, but their formation was so precise, so coordinated that anyone with tactical training would know these were not local law enforcement. Jordan eased her foot off the gas, showing no visible reaction. She tapped a code into the hidden panel beside the gear shift. Instantly, her vehicle's defense systems switched into full operational mode. She touched the brakes, letting the car roll to a stop before crossing into their perimeter. The door of the lead SUV opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, clad in a black suit layered over tactical armor. His stance was rigid, his face carved from stone. Someone who didn't understand the concept of compromise. He walked a few paces forward and spoke, voice low and clear. "Agent Blake, we've got your cover." Jordan gave a subtle nod, but didn't leave her seat. Their eyes locked, no words needed, just the silent electricity of people who had trained, served, and survived in the same world. But in the distance, headlights flared once more. The patrol car. Travis had looped back after realizing Jordan's turn was a decoy, and now he wasn't just entering a situation beyond his pay grade, he was stepping into a reality he'd never been prepared to face. Travis slammed on the brakes as he caught sight of the 3 vehicles blocking the road. Tires screeched in the night. One of the agents turned sharply, hand resting loosely on the grip of a sidearm. For a moment, the entire road lit up, under a net of cold, scanning eyes. Travis's door swung open. He stepped out, one hand instinctively brushing the side of his hip, near his gun. "Back away," one agent boomed, voice cutting through the air like thunder. "Federal operation, stand down immediately." Travis froze. The words hit like a blade across his thoughts. Federal operation. He hadn't heard that phrase since academy training. Something you study in theory, but never expect to meet on a midnight roadside. He glanced toward Jordan, who now stepped out of her vehicle. Small frame, steady posture. Under the sharp beam of headlights, her eyes were no longer guarded. They were commanding. "Who are you?" Travis asked, the words barely escaping his throat. Jordan didn't answer right away. She reached into her inner coat pocket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and flipped it open. The golden badge gleamed under the light, flanked by a stark line of text. United States Secret Service. Travis's entire world collapsed in that instant. He stumbled back a step. His mouth opened, but no words came. His throat locked tight. He had convinced himself she was hiding something. Every move she made had been decoded through the filter he trusted. And now, she was federal. Not a threat. Not a criminal. A protector. A cold gust swept between them, and in that moment, Travis realized he wasn't just wrong. He'd been trained wrong, raised wrong, conditioned to believe that people like her couldn't exist in places like this. Not with power, not without fear. He couldn't speak. His tongue felt like it was glued to the roof of his mouth, his fists clenched, not in anger, but shame. He'd chased her, profiled her, projected every fear he'd inherited from a broken system, simply because she didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't fit the mold. More agents stepped out of the other SUVs. None of them looked at Travis. Not a glare, not a word, but that silence hit harder than any reprimand. Their indifference was a verdict. No one accused him of anything, and somehow that made it worse. He stood there, alone, a small figure in a world he thought he understood, now folding in on itself like a crumbling illusion. The forest air hung thick with pressure, as if the night itself had condensed beneath the weight of the black SUVs. Parked in a horizontal line, their headlights carved Travis into a distorted, solitary silhouette. Behind him, his cruiser idled quietly, but inside him, the engine roared. He stood frozen, neither stepping back nor forward, bound by the unraveling of a self possessed that no longer held together. From the center SUV, another man stepped out, tall, solid. His gait held the kind of gravity that made the earth seem cautious beneath his boots. He didn't need to introduce himself. His presence did it for him. A fitted black suit over tactical armor, a comms device clipped to his ear, and a voice like metal on metal. "Officer Denton, I'm Agent Colton Vega, United States Secret Service. The current situation falls under federal jurisdiction. You are hereby instructed to stand down and withdraw immediately." Colton didn't shout, he didn't threaten, but each word hit like a gavel cracking down on a desk. Travis opened his mouth and tried to form a response, but no sound followed. His logic, stretched thin by denial, now had no choice but to face the truth standing plainly before him. The luxury car wasn't a red flag. The woman's composure wasn't arrogance. It was justified, and he, so sure he was doing the right thing, was now standing on the wrong side of a line he'd never dared to cross before. Being wrong. Completely, unquestionably wrong. Vega's gaze met his, firm but not hostile. "If you remain here after this formal warning, you could be charged with obstruction of a federal operation. I trust you're smart enough not to let this get out of hand." Travis didn't move. His arms hung at his sides, but his hands had begun to tremble slightly. And it wasn't Vega's tone that rattled him. It was Jordan's eyes, watching him from across the line. She hadn't spoken. She didn't have to. Her gaze wasn't accusing. It was penetrating, unblinking. Then she stepped forward, not quickly, not aggressively, just enough to stand level with him. "You know what your problem is?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry or sarcastic, just measured. Travis swallowed hard. "Your problem," she continued, holding his gaze, "isn't the law. It's that you can't stand not being in control of someone like me." The silence that followed fell heavier than any siren. For Travis, the sentence echoed louder than anything he'd heard tonight, because it didn't just name his mistake, it held up a mirror to his entire path. The way he'd been taught to fear what was unfamiliar. The way suspicion had replaced protection. She hadn't mentioned race, but he couldn't deny it. It was the first thing that made him distrust her. He looked away, his jaw clenched. No one said another word, because nothing else needed saying. In that moment, every illusion he'd built around being a guardian of order crumbled. And it wasn't someone else who tore it down, it was the truth he'd never dared to look at. Colton stepped forward, not threatening but clear. "You should go, Officer Denton. If not, I'll be forced to report your interference, and believe me, it won't be an easy report to explain." Travis still didn't meet anyone's eyes. He stared into the dark tree line, where branches tangled like a curtain between worlds. Everything that used to be so clear to him, who's legal, who's suspicious, who's safe, now lay shattered at his feet. He swallowed again, this time like swallowing glass. No one yelled. No one forced him to kneel. But the feeling of being unmasked, not by force, but by a woman he deemed out of place, cut deeper than any punishment. He turned slowly and walked toward his cruiser. His boots scraped against the gravel, making a faint, grating sound, like the gnashing of teeth in the cold night. Travis remained frozen in his patrol car, hands clamped so tightly around the steering wheel that the blood had drained from his knuckles. Jordan's final words echoed relentlessly in his mind, like a voice reverberating from the walls of some deep, dark chamber, cold, steady, and impossible to refute. Outside, the air seemed still, as if the tension had settled, but beneath that silence was a pressure thick enough to warn that something far worse was about to erupt. The black SUVs hadn't budged. Their headlights continued slicing through the mist, casting long beams that lit the agents standing in rigid formation, unmoving and silent, like statues forged from iron. Jordan never looked back at him. She stood by her vehicle, scanning the dark spaces between the distant trees. The wind had shifted, now carrying a faint burnt scent, hot asphalt and the chemical sting of gunpowder, and then came another sound, a heavy, mechanical rumble, low and rhythmic, unlike anything Travis had heard on civilian roads. It wasn't just noise, it was the growl of something caged for too long, now finally unleashed. Jordan recognized it instantly. She moved to the rear of the vehicle, hand already hovering near the weapon holstered at her side. Without any commands given, the entire formation of agents shifted into active defense mode. Their bodies responded automatically, each one sliding into position with the kind of precision only years of combat drills could build. Colton Vega narrowed his eyes, looking toward the edge of the woods, where the first flickers of distant headlights began to cut through the trees. It wasn't just one. 3 military trucks were speeding down the incline in tight formation, headlights off, their bodies cloaked in matte paint designed to scatter light and avoid reflection. The tires were chain-wrapped, their reinforced bumpers mounted with plated shielding, clearly not built for patrol or transport. These were assault vehicles. No one could mistake it. Before the lead truck had even come to a full stop, the side door flung open violently. Men in dark combat gear dropped out one after another, each gripping a suppressed assault rifle with the safety already switched off. Their movements were clean and economical, no wasted steps, no unnecessary looks. This wasn't caution, it was execution. No warnings were shouted, no sirens blared, no bullhorn orders. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to attack, and their target was Jordan's SUV. The first bullet cracked the air and punched straight through the windshield of the closest black vehicle. A second later, a volley of gunfire tore into the forest clearing, rattling the ground like a small-scale earthquake. The earth vibrated with the repeated impact of suppressed automatic fire. The gunshots thundered through the trees, bouncing back as rolling echoes like a storm caught in a cage. Bullets ripped into the armored SUVs, shredding through the paint, peeling back metal, spitting fragments like shrapnel into the night. Jordan's team fanned out immediately, locking down into a tight perimeter, every agent taking the exact position they'd trained for, weapons raised, bodies crouched, forming a protective ring around the SUV and the briefcase hidden inside it. Travis didn't understand what was happening. The sound of the first shot had slammed him back into his seat like a sledgehammer. His pulse spiked, not from adrenaline, but from the suffocating panic of knowing this was real and he had no control. He froze, exactly the way textbooks described when someone encountered death for the first time. Fight, or freeze. Jordan, on the other hand, was already pressed low to the ground, her body blending into the shadows as she moved swiftly between the gaps. Her hand reached for the latch underneath the vehicle, disengaging the security lock on the rear vault, the one holding the case. Bullets zipped just inches overhead, but she didn't slow. Every agent around her performed their role with frightening precision. One slid beneath the rear bumper, rolled once and fired 2 clean shots, dropping a hostile who'd tried to flank from the right. Colton Vega shouted into his radio for backup, then sprinted toward Jordan's position, using his broad frame to shield her. Travis remained hunched inside his patrol car, his eyes wide with panic, mouth agape, but no sound came out. What was unfolding outside the windshield felt foreign, utterly disconnected from anything he'd ever faced before. His worst nights on duty usually involved reckless drivers or the occasional bar fight. But here, now, in this moment, was an organized assault, with real weapons, real bullets, and real death. He was a police officer, but he'd never been a soldier. A single shot slammed into his car's hood with a violent crack, making Travis jerk upright and smash the back of his head against the roof. The windshield splintered instantly, a web of fractures spreading across the glass. Disoriented and shaken, he collapsed between the seat and the floor, the world spinning around him. Outside, the chaos grew louder, more chaotic. Gunfire, boots pounding on the pavement, the screech of torn metal, and the incomprehensible shouts of tactical commands that meant nothing to his overwhelmed mind. A Secret Service agent from Jordan's team vaulted across the hood of the patrol car, landed cleanly on the other side, and kept firing without missing a beat. He wasn't afraid, wasn't hesitant. He moved like someone who had done this too many times to count. Travis tried to lift his head. Through the smoky haze, he caught a glimpse of Jordan signaling her team, her body low and precise, her eyes sharp beneath the flicker of muzzle flashes. Her expression was unwavering. She wasn't reacting. She was leading. She was coordinating, retaliating, protecting, not just the briefcase behind her SUV, but every person around her, including someone like him. Behind her vehicle, one of the attackers broke cover, raised his weapon, and took aim directly at her. Travis saw the figure clearly in the rearview mirror. His throat clenched. He wanted to scream, to warn her, but all that came out was a broken gasp. His hand groped blindly for his gun, but his arm wouldn't obey. Every signal from his brain was rejected by a body locked in fear. Before he could move, another agent saw the threat and acted. 3 shots rang out, clean, precise, mechanical. The attacker dropped where he stood, his body crumpling to the pavement, rifle tumbling from his hand. Jordan didn't even flinch. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. And Travis understood. If she and her team weren't here tonight, he wouldn't have lived long enough to stay afraid. Bullets kept tearing through the air like a swarm of hornets gone mad, slamming into the hood, the doors, and the asphalt around them. Gunpowder thickened the air into a smoky haze that distorted vision, while the sharp clangs of metal and rubber, crashing together, echoed like a chaotic battlefield symphony. Travis lay curled beneath the driver's seat, his whole body drawn tight like someone who'd just awakened inside a nightmare. But this wasn't a dream. This was real. The bullets were real. The dead were real. And he, a police officer with a badge and a firearm, was the most useless person on the field. Outside, Jordan kept signaling to the agents covering the right flank. Her eyes swept every shadow. Her awareness cut through the noise. She was no longer the woman in civilian clothes, who'd been questioned less than 20 minutes ago. She was a soldier, disciplined, composed, and fully in command. Then it happened. A unit of mercenaries broke off from the main group, veering toward Travis's patrol car. They spotted the dim glow of the dashboard and, more importantly, the silhouette of someone huddled inside. No tactical gear, no visible protection. An easy target. The leader of the 3 raised a clenched fist. The other 2 immediately split off, circling wide through the tree line. He stayed center, rifle already raised, its sight fixed squarely on the driver's side window. Inside the vehicle, Travis still had no idea. It wasn't until the first round shattered the side window, exploding the glass into shards across the cabin, that he bolted upright as a panicked animal jolted from its cage. No thought, no logic, only raw survival instinct launched him forward as he kicked open the door and threw himself into the open air. But it was a mistake. The ground outside offered no cover, no protection. Within seconds, the muzzle flashes zeroed in on him. Bullets screamed past, and one grazed his shoulder, slicing through his shirt and scorching the skin beneath like fire. He staggered forward a few more steps before crashing to the pavement, hands scraping the rough surface, blood smearing into dust as his vision blurred and spun. No one ran out to help him, no one except Jordan. From a distance she saw him. Without hesitation, Jordan shoved aside the agent shielding her flank and broke from cover, sprinting through the open space with no second thoughts. While the rest of her team continued to lay down fire and hold the perimeter, she cut across the hail of bullets like a cold wind, sharp, focused, and unshakable. Her strides were silent but calculated. She didn't fire, she didn't flinch. She ran straight toward Travis. By the time she reached him, he was struggling to get up, but his legs no longer obeyed him. Another shot cracked the air and struck the asphalt just inches from his elbow, forcing his arm to go limp as he collapsed again, face first onto the ground. Jordan didn't scream. She didn't call his name. She simply charged forward, dropped low, and hauled him up with one powerful motion. Pain shot through Travis's body as her shoulder slammed into his ribs, wrenching a groan from his throat. But she didn't stop. With trained efficiency, Jordan dragged him across the pavement, sliding him behind the armored flank of the nearest SUV, where an agent had just taken out a sniper and was scanning west for the next threat. She pushed him hard against the cold metal of the vehicle, pinning his back to the steel as bullets zipped past behind them. Blood from a shallow wound on his shoulder soaked through the thin fabric of his shirt. His eyes were wide, his throat dry. Not from pain, but from absolute shock. Jordan didn't look at him immediately. Her gaze swept the clearing, signaling two agents to close in on the right flank before finally turning back to him, her eyes not angry, not pitying, but heavy with a weary kind of truth. Her voice was low, steady, and somehow cut through the chaos still thundering around them. You're going to die because of your pride, not your duty. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to threaten him. The words sliced straight through him, exposing the thin armor of self-imposement he'd built around his night patrol badge. Travis couldn't speak. His lungs felt vacuumed of air. The woman he had doubted, profiled, followed, was now crouched in front of him, putting herself in the line of fire for someone who'd never earned it. He understood it instantly. She didn't save him because she needed him or owed him. She did it because she was the only one here still treating his life as something worth protecting, not because of rank or uniform or usefulness, just because he was a person. He turned away, eyes dropping from her face to his dust-covered boots, then back up to her hand, still gripping the pistol with absolute focus. His badge, his uniform, the weapon at his side, none of it had shielded him. None of it had meant anything when it counted. A cop in uniform, too paralyzed to act. A federal agent in civilian clothes, brave enough to save him. And in that moment, Travis finally understood. It isn't the title that defines courage. It's the choice. When everything falls apart, his back pressed against the cold steel of the armored SUV, Travis gasped for breath, his wide eyes never leaving Jordan. She was leaning to her right now, issuing hand signals to the distant squad, her weapon shifting fluidly with each motion, like it was simply an extension of her own body. No wasted movements, no hesitation. He had never seen a woman who made him feel fear and respect at the same time. Jordan tilted her head toward him once more. No encouragement, no comfort, just a gaze that seemed to pierce through the uniform, the badge, the shell he wore, digging deep into the hollow part of him that had been hiding from this moment all his life. Then she turned away, not because she dismissed him, but because she didn't need anything from him. Not help, not approval, nothing. Travis swallowed hard. A cold numbness spread from his chest to his throat, not from the graze on his shoulder, but from the overwhelming sense of inadequacy that clung to him like a second skin. He couldn't stop replaying what he'd seen. Jordan running through gunfire to drag him out of the open, Jordan covering him with her own body, Jordan commanding while he cowered, and that voice, those sharp, merciless words, stripped away every illusion he'd ever had about what it meant to hold power. Gunfire cracked again. Agent Colton Vega shouted for fallback to Position 2. Enemy snipers were now securing the ridgeline. A smoke grenade skidded past Travis, bounced twice, then detonated in a burst of white-gray fog that swallowed the clearing. The bitter tang of sulfur filled his lungs and made him cough uncontrollably, eyes watering from the sting. A shadow moved from behind Jordan, fast and silent. The figure was dressed in full tactical gear, rifle raised, circling in from the blind spot on the right side of the SUV. Travis didn't know why he saw him first. Maybe it was luck. Maybe the angle just happened to align. Or maybe it was something deeper, some buried instinct finally screaming to life in the back of his mind. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Jordan didn't see him. Time slowed. Travis could still smell the gunpowder hanging in the air and feel the cold sweat rolling down the back of his neck. He locked eyes with the man just as the attacker's finger curled on the trigger. All the noise seemed to vanish into a vacuum, leaving only the sound of his heartbeat pounding like war drums in his ears. He lifted his arm. The pistol that had hung useless at his hip was now cold and firm in his grip. His finger slid over the trigger. His arm trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that if he hesitated for even a second, she would die. He pulled the trigger. The bullet sliced through the air and struck the man square in the chest. The mercenary jolted backward, arms flailing as he collapsed hard onto the pavement, rifle clattering beside him. Jordan whipped around instantly, eyes sharp as blades, scanning the downed attacker's position. She said nothing. She just looked at Travis and gave him a single nod. That was all. But for Travis, it felt like a current ripping through his spine, tearing away years of fog and delusion, years of wearing a badge without ever truly knowing what it meant. The tremble in his hand hadn't stopped, but this time it didn't hold him back. He moved. No longer hiding, no longer frozen, he left cover and rushed toward Jordan, crouching low behind the SUV beside her. An agent nearby tossed him a reload. Travis caught it, nodded, and said nothing. His hands were still shaky, but his steps now carried weight. They pushed right, toward the flank, where 3 mercenaries were attempting to circle the rear. Travis ducked behind a storage crate, took a deep breath, and leaned out to aim. The first shot missed, but the second forced one attacker to drop low. The agent beside Travis seized the moment and fired, taking the hostile down in a clean, practiced burst. Travis moved with them. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the most accurate, but he was fighting. No longer curled up beneath a steering wheel, no longer paralyzed. Every bullet he fired wasn't just to protect himself, but to protect the people beside him. Each time he changed mags, he looked around, stayed alert, and listened for orders. He didn't let pride speak louder than duty. Not anymore. On the left flank, Jordan was still in motion. Travis watched her slide between 2 armored SUVs, dropping 2 more attackers with just 4 shots. The brief explosion behind her lit up the smoke like a flare, casting her silhouette in harsh relief, unbreakable, unstoppable. When she turned to check the rear perimeter, her eyes landed on Travis, who was now crawling low across the ground, his weapon raised, smoke still curling from the barrel. She said nothing, but their eyes locked, and in that glance something passed between them, quiet but undeniable. Travis was no longer the man being dragged through a war zone. He was beside her now, not just in the body, but in belief. The gunfire began to thin, not because ammunition had run dry, but because both sides were shifting position, bracing for what everyone knew would be the deciding play. Jordan and her team pressed in close behind the line of armored vehicles, where fresh intel from the low-flying surveillance drone had just confirmed the worst. The commander of the mercenary force was entering the kill zone. Facial recognition left no doubt. It was Kane Rourke, a former international gun-for-hire, long rumored responsible for brutal paramilitary strikes across Africa and Eastern Europe, a man forged in blood and chaos. He walked calmly between 2 heavily armed lieutenants in full tactical armor, rifles at the ready. But it wasn't the muscle or the weapons that caught Jordan's eye. It was his gaze, cold, still, calculated, like a man stepping into a game he already knew how to win. She exchanged a glance with Vega. No words were needed. Everyone understood the same truth. Take down Rourke, and this ends. Jordan signaled the team to split. Kayla and Miguel flanked left, while Travis and Vega circled right. She moved directly down the middle, using the burned-out shell of a pickup as a partial cover. The night air dragged the scent of gunpowder and iron across the dirt, the bitter smell of fresh blood, mixing with ash. Rourke stopped in the clearing, less than 10 meters from Jordan. With a casual wave, he sent his guards backward, then tossed his rifle aside with theatrical disdain. He was saying he didn't. Jordan gave Vega one last glance, a silent confirmation, then stepped out from cover. She said nothing, just shrugged off her long tactical coat, revealing the lightweight body armor strapped tight beneath. He was a mountain of muscle, easily a head taller than her. But Jordan didn't step back. Size had never been her concern. She'd faced worse. For her, the real fight wasn't in brute strength. It was in speed, precision, and control. Rourke made the first move, a vicious punch aimed straight at her jaw with startling speed, but Jordan twisted right, deflecting the blow, grabbing his wrist and using his own momentum to throw him off balance. It nearly worked, until he rebounded fast, slamming an elbow into her ribs and forcing her back 3 steps. Farther off, Miguel and Kayla kept Rourke's guards locked in, preventing them from breaching the inner perimeter. Travis kept his aim trained on Rourke and Jordan, but didn't dare fire. They were too close, too unpredictable. Rourke kicked low. Jordan ducked, dropped her stance, and snapped upward with a tight hook to his ribs. Something cracked, but he didn't fall. He growled, turned, and used his full weight to shove her hard, sending her crashing down beside the SUV's rear tire. He advanced, ready to finish it. But just as Jordan planted her hand to rise, a flicker of light blinked from behind Rourke. A signal. In that split second, as he raised his arm for a final strike, Travis fired. The bullet slammed into the ground just inches from Rourke's heel, throwing his stance off and forcing him to pivot. Jordan surged up. With one smooth motion, she grabbed her collapsible baton from her belt and swung it low, smashing it against his knee. He dropped with a grunt. She followed through without pause, drawing a tactical blade and slicing across his reaching hand with expert precision. Rourke screamed and reeled backward, but before he could regain footing, Vega fired a rubberized high-impact round, square into his chest. Rourke was hurled against the vehicle, spine hitting metal before he crumpled to the ground. Jordan didn't wait. He lunged, twisted his arm back in a clean lock, and drove her knee between his shoulders, pinning him to the dirt. Every inch of her movement was sharp and practiced. There were no mistakes. Travis rushed in, dropped to one knee, and held Rourke's shoulder while Vega secured the cuffs. The mercenary groaned, but the defiance in his eyes was gone. He muttered something through his teeth, but Jordan didn't listen. She just stared into him, hard, unwavering, as if to say, "You'll never control what you refuse to understand." Across the field, the remaining mercenaries began to scatter at the sight of their commander subdued. Kayla's voice rang out like a thunderclap. "Drop your weapons. Do not move." One man hesitated, hand inching toward a grenade. Travis didn't wait. He fired, striking the man's arm cleanly. The grenade hit the ground and rolled clear, exploding harmlessly in the dirt. Agents moved fast, surrounding and disarming the rest of the attackers. Hands cuffed, weapons seized. It was over, but Travis couldn't look away from Jordan. She stood tall amid the smoke, sweat streaking her face, dust coating her gear. No one said a word, but in the eyes of Vega, Kayla, and Travis, it was clear she had led them to victory. It was not a victory born of brute strength. It was a victory shaped by coordination, by trust, and the ability to recognize, even in the middle of battle, who was truly standing beside you, even if that person had once stood in your way. Jordan gave Travis one final look before turning away. No smile, no nod, but something in her eyes had changed. And for the first time, Travis didn't need her acknowledgement, because he understood his shot had made this moment possible, and this time he wasn't the one holding everyone back. The metallic clink of handcuffs echoed through the cold, open yard, mingling with the low groans of injured mercenaries now subdued. The night had just survived a suffocating battle, but instead of relief, the air only grew heavier. Hey, no one dared to exhale too soon. Jordan rested her hands on her knees, breath steadying. Beside her, Agent Vega was searching Rourke's body quickly, pulling out a USB drive taped beneath his vest, fake identification, and a crumpled paper contract. Jordan snatched the document, her eyes scanning its haphazardly typed lines, until something stopped her cold. Kayla had a mercenary pinned to the base of a tree, his leg bleeding from a gunshot wound. He wasn't fighting anymore. Maybe because he knew it was over. Vega stepped forward, flashlight harsh in the man's face. "Who hired you?" The mercenary looked around, then exhaled a tired, gritty breath like he'd been weighing the answers since the shooting started. Finally, he rasped, his voice dry and scarred. He used to be a congressional security advisor. Alan Prescott. No official title now, but he still got money and people. Everyone froze for a moment. Kayla's grip on her rifle tightened. Miguel cursed softly behind them. Vega's jaw clenched as he stepped in closer. "Prescott? Alan Prescott? You sure?" The mercenary nodded, grimacing from the pain, but his eyes were clear, sharp, sober. He gave Rourke the orders himself. We were just in it for the money. But he called this a national mission. Said she was a threat. Jordan said nothing. Her hand still gripped the paper contract, thin paper but trembling. At the top of the page, in bold type, read, "Prescott Initiative." Behind her, Travis went still. Inside his mind, images collided like shards from a shattered mirror. A firefight, a Black Ops crew, and then, suddenly, a face pulled straight from the headlines of politics and national security briefings. Alan Prescott. That name had once commanded respect on the floors of Congress. A risk analyst, a supposed expert on terrorism and smart border control, a man who had built a reputation for protecting the nation from chaos. Travis took a step back, his eyes unfocused. So the threat didn't come from outside, he muttered. It was already inside the system. He hadn't meant to speak loudly, but everyone heard, and no one disagreed. Jordan turned to him. She wasn't surprised by the truth, but she was surprised by his reaction. For the first time, his eyes weren't fixed on her with doubt. They were filled with horror, but not at her, at the system he had spent his life believing in. Vega moved fast, reporting back to HQ. As the agents began prepping prisoner transport and securing evidence, Jordan quietly pulled a device from her chest pocket. She plugged Rourke's USB into a secure port and crouched, connecting it to her encrypted tablet. The screen lit up, lines of code flickering, and then a voice recording played. Alan Prescott's voice came through the earpiece, calm, crisp, emotionless. "She's getting too close. If she completes the transfer, we lose everything. I don't care what it takes. Take her out." Jordan shut the tablet. Her expression sharpened like a blade, not because of the kill order, but because of the way he said her. Like she wasn't a person, just an obstacle, just a threat to be removed from the equation. Travis approached quietly. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer excuses. His eyes held something new, realization, as if, for the first time in his life, he was seeing a truth he had spent years avoiding. "How many like him are in the system?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Jordan didn't answer right away. She just looked toward the horizon, where the sky was beginning to pale, gray, blue light creeping past the edges of red, blinking towers in the distance. "Enough," she said quietly. "Enough to make sure I never take my hand off the trigger, and strong enough to make people who believe in the law start questioning what it protects. Just then, Vega returned and handed Jordan her encrypted comms. Orders from command. This data is to be protected at all costs. No agency, federal or otherwise, gets access until we verify every single tie to Prescott. Jordan nodded. She already knew. What just ended out here tonight was only the surface. Beneath it ran deeper networks of power, betrayal, and ghosts dressed in credentials. The first pale streaks of dawn stretched across the horizon, casting light on the wreckage of the battlefield. Shell casings scattered across the dirt, the acrid smoke of gunpowder still hanging in the air, a row of black SUVs idle in formation, and deep tire marks slashed across the ground like scars from a sleepless night. Everything was silent, not peaceful, but the kind of silence that follows after something true has been torn open. Travis stood apart, leaning against his patrol car, the tear in his shoulder sleeve flapping gently in the breeze, dried sweat and dirt still clinging to his face. His eyes didn't leave the team of agents ahead, people who moved like they were built to function in chaos, who never asked why, only what's next. At that moment, he felt like an outsider, like someone who'd wandered into the wrong room and just now realized it was never meant for him. A few steps away, Jordan was speaking quietly with Colton Vega, still clutching the thick file of classified evidence in her hand. The pages inside held words that, if made public, would shake the country to its core. But the orders were clear. This stays sealed. Not even Travis was to know. Vega had just received confirmation. They were moving out immediately, transporting the materials to a secure federal drop site before anyone else caught wind. When Jordan walked toward Travis, she didn't speak at first. She just looked at him, longer than she ever had before. There was no suspicion in her eyes anymore, just silence. Cold, exacting silence. The kind that comes from someone who has seen your truth and knows your limits. Travis opened his mouth, but she cut in before he could say a word. You don't need to say anything. What happened tonight, for you, ends here. No records, no statement, no report. Her voice was steady. Not a command, not a plea, just fact. He nodded, barely, a small motion, almost reflexive. He had no energy left to argue and no ground left to stand on. His mind was still spinning with images, pulling Jordan over, her dragging him out of gunfire, the shootout, the name Prescott. It had all been one long storm that stripped away every certainty he thought he had. He took a breath, pushed himself off the car and tried to form words, even though he wasn't sure. I was wrong. Jordan gave a quiet nod, not as forgiveness, but acknowledgement. He had finally seen. She turned halfway, then stopped. Without looking back, she spoke. Her voice was calm, but each word cut like a knife sharpened by the patience of every black woman who had ever survived inside a system built by white men. You used your authority like a whip to convince yourself you mattered, but this world doesn't need more cops like that. The words dropped like a verdict that needed no court. Not angry, not bitter, just the truth. Cold and solid as steel. Travis didn't argue. He couldn't. And for the first time, he didn't reach for excuses, grab at his badge, or recite some statute to justify his place. He just stood there, stripped bare by the longest night of his life, finally seeing himself not through his own eyes, but through the eyes of someone he had once judged. Jordan climbed into the SUV. Engines roared in unison. Headlights swept across Travis's frame before the convoy pulled onto the road, disappearing into the morning haze. The doors closed with quiet finality, not loud, but the sound echoed in his chest like something slamming shut. He turned slowly, opened the trunk of his car, pulled out a bottle of water, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. His hands were shaking. Not the patrol car rolled into the back lot of the precinct just as the sun rose above the tree line framing the quiet edges of town. Morning light spilled through the fogged windows, casting fractured reflections across the cold stone walls, like it was illuminating the true face of a day no one had wanted. Travis stepped out, his boots hitting the ground with a dull, heavy thud. There was no pride in his posture, no trace of a cop returning from a long, hard shift. What weighed on his shoulders wasn't injury. It was the full weight of a failure he could no longer deny. He pushed open the main entrance, walking down the hallway that had once felt familiar but now seemed to shrink under the cold glances of colleagues who had once shared overnight shifts with him, laughed over bad coffee, and passed around cheap jokes to kill time. No one greeted him, no one stopped him, but the silence they left in their wake spoke louder than any words. It told him exactly what he needed to know. He didn't belong here anymore, not the way he once thought he did. Before he could reach his desk, the clipped bark of his captain's voice rang out from the office down the hall. "Denton, my office. Now." Travis straightened, not out of protocol, but because there was nothing else to do. He turned and walked in like a man who already knew the sentence, and was just there to hear it said aloud. Captain Warner didn't look up when Travis entered. He simply slid a thin file across the desk. On top of it, a document stamped in red. Suspension notice. It wasn't thick, but it landed on Travis's chest like a stone. "I just got off the line with the feds," Warner said, his tone as dry as a morning report. "They won't say much, but they've ordered your immediate and indefinite suspension, pending internal review." Travis nodded. He didn't ask why. He didn't protest. Maybe because he knew there was no version of this where his explanation would change anything. "You acted without notifying command, without clearance, without cause," Warner continued, finally locking eyes with him. "And in doing so, you put this department at risk of a jurisdictional breach with a federal agency because of your ego." Still, Travis said nothing. "Your badge, your weapon, and all system access turned in by the end of today. As of now, you are no longer a representative of this department." Travis pulled out his wallet, retrieved the badge he'd worn for years, and set it down on the desk with both hands. Gently, but with finality. The soft metal clink on the wood rang sharp. What had once been a symbol of trust and power now sat there like a scar he couldn't erase. He left the office without a word. Down the hallway he could hear faint whispers bleeding from slightly open doors. He didn't need to catch the words. They were all the same. He was a story now, a cautionary tale, the fallen cop. Some smirked. Some averted their eyes. A few looked at him with a strange mix of pity and caution, like even glancing too long might stain them with the residue of his failure. Travis didn't stop at his desk. He didn't collect his personal items from the locker room. He just walked past all of it, out the back door, into the lot where patrol cars sat neatly parked under the trees. The sun had risen fully by then, no longer gentle but sharp and unforgiving, like the truth he was finally forced to face. He got into his vehicle, shut the door, and sat. He didn't turn the key. He didn't reach for the lights. Outside, the town moved forward in slow motion. Cars rolling by, a few people on their morning routes, a stray dog cutting across a quiet intersection. But inside the narrow shell of his car, Travis felt detached from all of it. He stared straight ahead, but his gaze was blank, unfocused, like he wasn't seeing the world anymore, just trying to understand where he'd gone wrong inside it. He didn't cry, but his chest was hollow, so tight he could barely breathe. A strange fear crept into his thoughts, quiet at first but persistent. If he hadn't been suspended today, would he have kept going the same way? If Jordan hadn't been a federal agent, would he have dragged her out of that car just to prove he was right? And if that had happened, who would have died? The question clogged his throat. It wasn't guilt that broke him. It was something worse. The realization that, for the first time, he couldn't hide behind the badge. There was no shield of procedure left to deflect the truth. All that remained was a single, brutal question. Had he ever been the good guy? Or just a man lost in the wrong direction who never stopped long enough to check the map? There was no answer. But maybe that silence, piercing, unrelenting, was exactly what he needed to make a choice. Later that night, sometime just after 2 a.m., Travis unlocked his phone and logged into the state police internal network. He didn't have to look long. The training section was right there. His finger hovered over one listing: Behavioral Reassessment and Implicit Bias Retraining Program. Below it, a blue button, Enroll Now. He didn't hesitate. He tapped it. And for the first time in years of wearing the badge, Travis Denton was starting over. Not as a cop trying to reclaim authority, but as a man learning how to make things right. The cold fluorescent lights of the training room reflected off Travis's neatly trimmed hair as he sat somewhere in the middle row, his posture upright but no longer taut like a spring ready to snap. The session opened with a question so simple it stunned him, maybe because he had never truly stopped to ask it himself. Is your authority used to protect or to control? The instructor, an older black woman whose voice was soft but deep like an underground current, didn't look at anyone in particular, and yet Travis could have sworn her eyes lingered on him just a beat longer than the rest. In the beginning, he kept to himself. He didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because he'd started to realize that most of what he once considered just doing the job was simply habit, left unchallenged. Every session brought real stories. A father handcuffed in front of his child for waiting outside a grocery store. A young woman stopped 3 separate times for driving a car deemed too nice for someone like her. Once, Travis might have justified it. There must have been a reason. The officer was just doing his duty. But now, no excuses came, just silence, and a slow, heavy exhale, as if somewhere inside him, an old brick wall was beginning to crumble. He learned about implicit bias, the kind that doesn't scream in slurs but hides in glances, in casual questions that seem harmless until you hear them repeated enough, like the one he'd asked Jordan. "This car doesn't seem like yours, does it?" That question now echoed in his mind like a slap without sound. Each time he played back an audio clip or watched a reenactment during class. But Travis no longer turned away. He kept his eyes on the screen, not to punish himself, but to make sure he never went back to being that man again. After class, he didn't rush home. Sometimes he sat alone in the empty gym. Other times he stood in the restroom mirror, looking at a face marked by new lines and stripped of old arrogance. One night, after a session on nonviolent communication, he drove through a quiet commercial strip downtown. The air was crisp, most stores had gone dark, and the only light came from a vending machine glowing faintly outside a corner shop. He spotted a young black teenager standing alone near an old payphone, shifting his weight, glancing around nervously like he was waiting for someone. The old Travis might have flicked on the spotlight, stepped out, and demanded ID, just following instinct, but not this time. This time, he rolled the window down and simply asked, "You waiting on someone?" The boy turned, startled, then nodded slowly. "My sister's in the store," he said, his voice a little shaky but not defensive. Travis nodded. He didn't press. Instead, he parked further down the curb, stepped out, and stood nearby. Not too close, no pressure, just there, hands in pockets, eyes on the shop entrance. Not as a cop watching a suspect, but as someone standing guard. The moment lasted maybe 3 minutes, but when the girl came out and they walked off together, the boy glanced back and said something that stuck with Travis long after. "Thanks. I thought you were going to be like the others." Travis didn't explain. He didn't need to, because he had been like the others, until he chose to start learning how not to be. The morning at the town's police department started with a routine briefing, no different from any other day, except for one detail. Travis Denton was finally allowed back on limited patrol. His reinstatement wasn't full, and his duties were restricted to low-risk, community-level calls. It was a trial, one that tested not only his progress, but the willingness of others to believe he could change. Travis didn't argue. He knew better now. After everything that had happened, expecting instant trust would have been naive. Trust didn't come from apologies or promises. It came from quiet, consistent actions that asked for no applause. Around noon, while scanning through civil reports, Travis received a tip from an old friend in the social services unit. A black mother and her 2 young children had been evicted from their apartment for contract violations. But when a caseworker pressed for details, the landlord refused to elaborate, merely stating that the family was disrupting the peace of the neighborhood, a phrase Travis had heard too many times before, often used as a polite veil for prejudice. No one had assigned him to this case. No one asked him to get involved, but Travis went anyway, not to score points, not for redemption, but because he knew that moments like this were the real test, where every instinct, every past mistake, every promise of change would be quietly, unflinchingly measured. The house sat in a modest residential block, calm but shadowed by wary glances anytime someone unfamiliar passed through. Travis parked along the curb and stepped out of his car, not in the way he used to, all badge and posture, but with a steadiness born of reflection and intent. The woman's name was Lydia. She was around 40, petite but with a look in her eyes that said she'd fought harder battles than most could imagine. Her 2 children were huddled on top of suitcases, toys and grocery bags scattered on the sidewalk like the remains of a life hastily packed. As Travis approached, she eyed him with the same suspicion Jordan Blake once did. "We don't need the police," she said flatly. As he neared, Travis stopped. He nodded slowly and kept his voice low and even. "I understand. I'm not here to give orders. I'm here to listen." Lydia didn't answer immediately, but when she realized he wasn't pushing, wasn't asserting authority, she began to speak. They'd lived there for over a year, paid rent on time, and never caused trouble. Things only changed after she hosted a birthday party for her son, some music and a little laughter. That's when the complaints began. The landlord started citing minor infractions and fabricated reasons, and eventually issued a termination notice. There was no legal dispute, but the pressure had left her with no options. Travis listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked her to wait in the car to keep the children out of the sun, then walked up the path to speak with the landlord, a middle-aged white man whose face stiffened with irritation as Travis offered a polite nod. "They're a nuisance," the man snapped. "I have the right to choose tenants that fit." "Fit by what criteria, sir?" Travis asked, voice calm but steady. "No loud music, no neighbors complaining. Has any formal complaint been filed with the department?" Silence. Travis held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no edge in his tone, only a kind of clarity that cut deeper. "You do realize, sir, that using property ownership to pressure someone out without legitimate cause can be interpreted as discriminatory?" The landlord's expression twisted as if preparing a rebuttal, but Travis raised his hand gently. "I'm not here to threaten you. I just want this resolved peacefully and transparently. If necessary, I'll involve legal and housing services. But I hope you reconsider, not because of the law, but because they're human beings." The conversation continued for more than 30 minutes. Eventually, the landlord agreed to delay the eviction, giving Lydia time to stabilize, and promised no further interference without proper cause. When Travis returned to the car, Lydia was still seated with her children. She rose as he approached, the wariness in her face now softened. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice shaky. "Maybe not," Travis replied, "but I wanted to." She stared at him for a long moment, then quietly said something that would stay with him forever. "I'd never had a cop actually listen to us before." Travis gave a small nod, not in pride, but in quiet acknowledgement. "I didn't used to. I'm learning." Under the sharp spring sunlight, Travis walked back to his car, not as someone who had just resolved a dispute, but as a man slowly rebuilding himself from the shards he had once shattered. March arrived with a quiet gray sky blanketing the small town. Travis had just wrapped up a community forum on improving relations between police and residents, a session he wasn't required to attend, but he'd gone anyway, sitting quietly in the back, saying nothing, only listening and taking notes. Back at the station, as he made himself a cup of coffee out of habit more than need, an internal email flashed across his screen. The subject line was brief, but made his hand pause in midair. Federal Local Law Enforcement Partnership Program, nominee from Southern Region. He opened it. It was an official invitation from the Office of Interagency Cooperation, a pilot initiative aiming to strengthen coordination across law enforcement levels, to eliminate power barriers and build transparent, trust-driven procedures, particularly in areas prone to racial tension and abuses of authority. Not everyone received such an invitation. As he scrolled through, Travis spotted his name under a specific section: personnel with prior misconduct, currently undergoing public rehabilitation and continued education. There was no flattery, no praise, just fact. But for the first time, Travis didn't take offense. He knew he wasn't redeemed. Not yet. But he also knew this was a step forward, another chance to learn, to do better. More importantly, it was proof that someone, somewhere up the chain, had noticed his efforts and believed he might be worth a sliver of trust, even if that trust was no more than a name typed on a government letterhead. At the bottom of the email was the signature of the program's federal liaison, Agent Jordan Blake. For a moment, everything around Travis seemed to fall silent. Her name, the name he had once tied to everything he misunderstood, misjudged, and tried to control, was now a door opening, not one of judgment, but of possibility. At that very hour, hundreds of miles away in a federal field office, Jordan Blake sat at her desk finishing the final notes on candidate reviews. A young assistant approached with a newly updated list from the Southern region. Jordan glanced through the names, and her eyes landed on the final line: Travis Denton, Hill County Patrol Division. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, not from surprise. She had already received reports from partner agencies that a local officer had quietly started to repair what he'd broken, that he'd voluntarily joined multiple reform programs and taken initiative in community conflict resolution, particularly in black neighborhoods. But seeing his name printed there, officially, was something else. She placed her hand on the keyboard but didn't type. Leaning back in her chair, she stared out the narrow window beside her. The late afternoon sun streamed in at an angle, cutting across the desk in a thin golden line. Her mind drifted to that night, the blinding headlights, the relentless sirens, the chaos that had erupted like a storm, and a cop she'd once believed to be rotten to the core, firing the bullet that saved her life. No one had told him to do it, just like no one was forcing him to change. Jordan had seen both kinds of change in her career. The kind that came from fear, of suspension, of being exposed, and the rarer kind, the kind that emerged from a reckoning with truth, with guilt, with oneself. The second kind was rare, precious. She raised her hand and clicked to approve Travis's inclusion. When her assistant hesitated and asked quietly, "Are you sure, Agent Blake? He nearly compromised your mission," Jordan didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on the screen and said softly, "Not for the assistant, but for herself. He's changed. Then this time, we'll be on the same side." It was a simple line, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken. The doubt she'd once held, the fury she'd once swallowed, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, people could outgrow the shadows they'd cast themselves. Not because they were forgiven, but because they dared to confront who they had been and chose to fix it without demanding applause. In a world still rife with mistrust, this reunion wasn't about reopening old wounds. It was a test, a chance to see whether a man like Travis, if he truly stood for justice now, could stay standing when it stopped being easy again. And as the system pinged to confirm that his application had been processed, Travis Denton, the man who once wore his badge like a weapon, was now facing a new test, to carry it like a symbol of responsibility. The sunset cast a soft golden glow over the old rooftops of a southern city neighborhood, tinting rusted tin sheets and worn-down basketball courts with the warmth of fading light. On a cracked slab of cement, children ran barefoot, chasing a worn rubber ball, their sneakers scraping across the ground. like laughter echoing in a place untouched by the weight of prejudice. Among them, a man in a navy blue t-shirt, faded jeans, and modest sneakers spun a basketball between his palms. Travis tossed it in the air and caught it with a slightly clumsy but relaxed motion. Sweat glistened on his brow, his cheeks flushed from the game, but what had changed most was his gaze. Not stiff, not guarded, no longer searching each face for threat or suspicion. Instead, it was calm, open, someone who was slowly learning how to live, for real, in the community he had once misunderstood, once feared, and once unconsciously treated as dangerous. A boy with a mop of curly hair darted past him, snatched the ball, and yelled, "You're losing this time, mister." Travis laughed and gave chase. Not too fast, just enough to keep the game going, as if what mattered wasn't winning, but preserving this moment, a space where skin color drew no line, and his presence no longer stirred fear. On nearby porches, mothers watched in silence. Some nodded subtly. No one said it out loud, but they could all feel it. Something had shifted. Not the city itself, but something inside the man playing with their children. That man had once been the reason they locked their doors tighter, but now he wasn't hiding his past. He was answering for it, not with apologies, but with quiet, steady action. Between the bursts of sprinting, Travis would sit on a concrete bench, talk to the kids, ask what schools they went to, what subjects they liked, what they dreamed of becoming. No notepad in hand, no radio on his shoulder, just ears that listened, and a heart still learning how to see beyond assumptions. One evening, as dusk settled and the rooftops blushed orange under the last sunlight, Travis thought of his father, the man who never struck him but never spoke with gentleness either. Every lesson came in the form of warnings, stern glares, and ironclad rules he believed were necessary for surviving in an unstable America. Now, Travis understood. His father hadn't meant to pass down harm. He simply didn't know another way. But Travis did, and he had a choice. He could either keep the cycle going, or he could be the one to break it. Hundreds of miles away, inside a federal SUV moving steadily along a dark highway, Jordan Blake sat behind the passenger seat. The soft glow from her tablet screen lit up her face, composed, clear-eyed. With each new assignment, she reminded herself to stay detached, to separate the heart from a mission. But this time, when she saw the name Travis Denton listed as a representative from the Hill County Police Department for an upcoming interagency coordination meeting, something unfamiliar tugged at her, like a single thread pulling at the edge of tightly woven fabric. Beside her, Agent Colton Vega leaned slightly and asked, voice low but curious, "You think he'll hold the line this time?" Jordan didn't answer right away. She thought of the last time she saw Travis. No more defensiveness in his eyes, no more justifications, just a man standing before her, owning what he had done, without needing to be told to. She took a deep breath, looking past the window at the night sky settling into its indigo stillness, a blank canvas for a chapter not yet written. Then she replied, quiet but certain, "I don't believe he's perfect, but I believe he's trying." The SUV pressed forward, headlights cutting through faint rows of streetlights. Time moving on, never stopping, never rewinding. Out there, the world was still messy, still biased, and still broken in many places. But somewhere, a former officer who once failed was doing the slow work of becoming better, and a black federal agent, once doubted for her voice and strength, was now extending her hand, not in forgiveness but in partnership. For those willing to change, there would be no triumphant ending, no invincible heroes, just flawed people, rising after the fall, learning to listen, learning to protect, without the need to dominate. Because sometimes what matters most isn't who you were, but whether you have the courage to never be that person again. In a society where prejudice can kill empathy, the story of Travis Denton reminds us that change doesn't begin with a grand moment of heroism. It begins with the courage to admit you're wrong and the humility to start again. From a skeptical police officer to someone who listens and chooses to stand with the community instead of over it, Travis transformed, and it was Jordan Blake, the one once doubted, who helped him see. Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance if they truly want to make things right? If this journey spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help spread more stories that matter.